Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. The most ferocious religious conflicts are often not those between different religions, but rather between various streams within a common religion. That is no longer the case in context of Christianity between Catholics, Protestants, and Orthodox, but it is certainly the case in Islam, with the Shiites led by Iran hostile towards the Sunnis led by Egypt and Saudi Arabia. To look at the current state of affairs in the Shiite-Sunni relationship and what it may mean for Israel, we're joined here in the studio by Colonel Reuven Ben-Shalom, who is a cross-cultural strategist and associate at the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism. Welcome. I'd like us to welcome our TV7 analyst, Mr. Amir Oren, and Dr. Yossi Mansharof, who is a research fellow at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security and the Ezri Center at Haifa University. Welcome. Mr. Oren, give us a broader update on the various challenges currently occurring throughout the Middle East between the Shiite and Sunni Muslims.
Well, as we all know, for the last couple of centuries, the world order has been focused on nation states. But in the Middle East, we have such a combination of tribes, cultures, languages, religions, as you said, streams within religions, that the state of affairs here is not so clear. There have been pan-Arab movements, but also Islamist movements and organizations, some of them led by Shiites, who see themselves as the underprivileged. They have grievances against the ruling Sunnis of the Arab world. And what we have seen over the last 20 years or so, ever since the emergence of Al-Qaeda and then of the Islamic State, and alongside that, the salience of Iran as a regional power, is that the Sunni versus Shiite schism is impacting even those states which were looked upon as quite stable, such as Syria and Iraq, and Israel, being a Jewish state by definition, Jewish and democratic state, sees itself between the Sunnis and the Shiites, but aligning itself right now with the Sunnis, as you mentioned, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, other Gulf countries. We also have Turkey, which is Sunni, but not Arab, and is hostile towards Israel. We also have the Muslim Brotherhood, which is Sunni, but again, hostile. So it's quite a mixed bag, out of which Israel tries to fight its way.
Colonel Ben-Shalom, as we quite are aware in the West, the two main organizations that have riddled the international community, at least in the battle against terrorism, have been Sunni Muslim organizations, specifically the Islamic State in recent years, and this organization, of course, came out of part of Al-Qaeda, the Iraq branch, which was always perceived as not really loyal to Al-Qaeda as a whole. Nevertheless, Al-Qaeda is still fully operational. It's not been as effective as in the past when it comes to its declared goal of conquering the world and the West as well. But it has all kind of offshoots with different names. We hear Jabhat al-Nusra, Tahrir al-Sham, different organizations that are still very much active in their bid to Islamicize or make sure that the world becomes Muslim, and also in the battle against the Shiite Muslims. Can you tell us more about the challenges perceived vis-a-vis those Sunni Muslim organizations?
Well, first, I think the main challenge for us is that it doesn't enable us to go to our regular Israeli tendency, which is to have things at very simple patterns. We like to have good guys, bad guys, we're affiliated with these guys, fighting them, and of course this mix in the Middle East does not work. The very fact that the most extremist groups that we've faced in the last decade have been Sunni groups, in a way shatters our conception as if the Sunnis are the moderates and the Shiites, those are the extremists. For us Israelis, it's very simple. Bad guys means Iran, right? The whole arch in the north, which is the Shiite movement, and all of a sudden we have something that in a way breaks that. Second issue for a small country like Israel, but with strategic goals and many security challenges, is to understand, if at all, to align ourselves. So I think here our main challenge is to not take sides, not say we're aligned with these and not aligned with that, but more play the game. I would even call it the Chinese strategy, where you don't put emotions and you don't put a lot of religious aspects behind it. You just say, what are my interests? What does the board look like? Who are the players? How can I promote my interests and promote them, vis-a-vis the various players on the board? Notice that when we were fighting, I say we, the whole world, the West, were fighting ISIS, there were these alliances where, in a way, the United States and Iran were not partnering, but promoting the same goals, while at the same time, Iran is perceived the big enemy of the West. So the big challenge for us is perception, taking that to strategy, and how to navigate on this board.
Dr. Mansharof, when we're talking about the Shiite organizations, however, which are predominantly led by the Islamic Republic of Iran following the 1979 revolution, we talk primarily about Hezbollah, the most familiar organization of them all, which is Iranian proxy in Lebanon that follows through the Shiite organization aspirations of regional dominance, at least as a first stage. And then we have also Hashd al-Shabi, which is an alliance of various Shiite organizations. We have the Houthis. But what is common between all of those organizations? What is their aspiration and activities today throughout the Middle East and the world at large?
First, as was said before, the strategic goal is to change the balance between Sunnis and Shiites. For centuries, the Sunni has been the ruler of the Middle East, and now the Shiites want to take the lead. It is the vision of Khomeini, who led the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and he has the vision of exporting the Islamic Revolution. So Tehran accordingly suggests money, weapons, arms, guidance, whatever you need in order to change this balance and to take the lead for the sake of the Shiite world at the expense of the Sunnis, and even at the expense of the Shiites who do not want the assistance of Iran. And there are many Shiites who don't want to take the example of Iran.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Oren, I'd like to touch base, as both Colonel Reuven Ben-Shalom and Dr. Yossi Mansharof indicated. It is primarily about the Sunni Shiite rivalries, but there are also differences within those denominations. But when we look at the true challenges of the Middle East, it's not necessarily about Israel, even though it's depicted that way a lot in the media. Israel is not a party to the main battle, which is between the Shiites and Muslims, primarily between Iran and Saudi Arabia, for that matter. But if we take back a few years, about 1,000 years ago, when Salahuddin, the general of the Muslim armies, actually became the new caliph of the Muslim world, he actually changed the equation of power from the Shiite caliph in front of him, or Muslim religious leader of the world, and he moved it towards the Sunni Muslims, he himself being a Kurd. The Kurds, of course, are Sunni Muslims by their religion and their ancestry. To what degree do we see this trend of trying to pull back towards the Shiites, something that, to a certain degree, is almost impossible without an all-out war on multiple fronts, which may, of course, perpetuate an already chaotic region?
The common denominator to Sunnis and Shiites is perhaps bigger than the division between them, even though it doesn't seem that way, especially when they kill each other. But first of all, it's religion versus national movements. The question of whether you are a religious believer and therefore it is really a total belief. There is no place for compromise if you are such a believer. While territorially you can compromise between two national movements. Also, there is the question of how do you deal with the West, with the outsider, with the occupier. And then again, the way Sunnis in Egypt and Shiites in Iran reacted to what they considered invaders is quite similar. Now, you take the example of Lebanon. Lebanon is multi-confessional. You have, of course, Maronites and other Christians. You have Shiites. You have Sunnis. And when Israel tried in the 1950s to reach some sort of an understanding with the Lebanese, dominated at the time by the Phalange and other Christian organizations, Israel was told it won't work. This is a lesson it should have known in 1982. It won't work. Why? Because the Arabs looked at the Mediterranean, at the eastern shelf of the Mediterranean, and they said, listen, the Turks, even though the Turks are Muslim, but the Turks took Hatay, Alexandretta, on the northeastern part of the Mediterranean. Israel took the southeastern part until it reaches Gaza and Egypt. We are not going to allow the middle part, the Lebanese part, to be excluded from the Arab League. So the Arab League was the mechanism, not the Muslim League, which was headquartered in Malaysia or Indonesia outside of the Middle East. And of course, you had Pakistan vis-a-vis India, again, Hindus versus Muslim. So what we are seeing now is really the effort by various Muslim groups to make Islam great again, to go back to the halcyon days of Andalus and other places where the Muslims were rulers. The Middle East per se is only a stepping stone towards that goal. And as you said, the Sunnis in Gaza, led by Hamas, get help from wherever they can. They are an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, but they are willing to take assistance from the Shiites in Iran in order to advance their interests. So it is very simplistic, and it is futile on our part to try and predict behavior according to religion.
Colonel Ben-Shalom, the matter of Iran is, of course, right now and has been for quite some time now, a focal point in the battle with a radical regime that seeks to export its revolution and openly declares its intention to do so. But at the same time, we see that the focus of the countries in the region is not necessarily to vocally confront it to the degree as we see Israel doing, but we see Saudi Arabia, we see other countries in the region using proxies in order to try and push them away or weaken them to a certain degree. Is this something, is this method part of an Islamic thought behind it, or is this an action undertaking as a strategy that they don't want to be perceived as the weak ones in the face of the international community when the Iranians are so bold and willing to fight on their own merits?
There's several aspects to this. First, for many years, I saw the whole issue of the Middle East as Sunni, Shia, religious, going back to what happened 1,400 years ago, who was supposed to be the successor of Muhammad. And I respect that, by the way, from my Muslim friends. But now I'm not sure. I think there are a lot of religious aspects, surely, in the differences between them. But I think mostly what we see playing out now is a political game and a strive for power by the major players in the region, maybe even the old empires wishing to regain their power and go back to what they used to be. Us, human beings are fascinating beings in the way that we have this issue, this ability to remember 1,400 years back and even celebrate our holidays today, what happened then, and have a deep understanding of what it meant back then and what it could mean now. So when I see Iran now, what I see is, by the way, not the Iranians, but the Iranian regime, the specific regime now. That's the way I see it, which means it could change in a day as it changed in a day. That's my personal belief. I think that's what it is. It's this struggle of power. And as far as your remarks, I think I may see it the opposite. I think what we're seeing now is a crystallization of this clash. And the players in the region are more overtly speaking out about Iran being the main rival. Will we see a direct war? Probably not, because it's so easy for everyone to play this proxy war. But the main war in the Middle East now, I think, is Saudi Arabia, Iran, fighting a proxy war in all the countries from Lebanon to Yemen, and I think it's working for them. So I think that's the game, and I don't think we will see in the near future this thing coming to fruition for one side. It will probably take another 100 years.
Dr. Mansharof, would you agree with that?
Yes, totally agree. It was actually the vision of Khomeini when he established the Iranian regime. He said, we don't have to fight Saudi Arabia and Israel by ourselves. We can use our fellows in the Shiite countries, Shiite communities, especially Lebanon, and that's how Hezbollah was established in order to promote Islamic revolutions in Kuwait, Bahrain, Iraq, Yemen, and then to fight Israel. Only then to fight Israel. They knew that they cannot do it face to face against Saudi Arabia. That's why they established Hezbollah Hijaz. The Iranian IRGC established Hezbollah Hijaz. This is the Saudi Hezbollah. It was established in Tehran, and they launched various attacks against Saudi interests, including in Mecca and Medina, and assassinations attacks against diplomatic missionaries of Saudi Arabia elsewhere. And that's how the vision of Khomeini and then Khamenei was translated into actions. And this is exactly what you meant, that the proxy war is exactly the vision of Khomeini that we've seen today.
One has to look at the defining characteristics of each era. Obviously, some 80 years ago, it was Nazi Germany, and the Americans, when they joined the war, allied themselves with the Soviets, even though only a few years earlier they established diplomatic relations with them. They were against the Bolshevik Revolution. And then it changed, and for the Americans, the Soviets became the enemy. So when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, the Americans helped the Mujahideen. They didn't mind radicalizing the Muslims against the Soviets, and then it boomeranged against them. And so the question becomes, is a movement only defensive, or does it go on the offensive, as was mentioned here? It exports the revolution. It whets its appetite. They managed to push away the invaders, in this case the Soviets. So why don't they go and hit them at the base? And not only them, the West too. So we have to see what is the wave of the present. What is the current spirit of the time? Perhaps we are now on the receding side of the wave.
Colonel Ben-Shalom, would you agree?
Well, totally. And looking forward, one might think that because of what's going on in the last decade and the civil war in Syria and what's happening in Yemen, things couldn't get worse. I think they could get worse. I think also countries that we tend to see as maybe more quiet, like Lebanon, even though for us, Lebanon is a serious problem, but Lebanon is a fascinating country, and they've been doing a very good job in trying to mitigate all the various factions there. But I think also Lebanon is an explosive situation, and who knows where it's going to go from there, in the way Hezbollah took over the country. And I think maybe it's been quiet so far, but it could turn into a Yemen very fast. So looking forward, I have no way of interpreting where this will go, especially because of the issue that it's hard to understand. We're a bunch of Israelis interpreting Muslims and their deep feelings and religious aspirations, etc. I'm not sure if we had several Arabs from the region here on the table, they would agree what exactly are the tensions, what exactly are the interests. These are more things that evolve, and they have deep emotional and cultural aspects to them, and we'll see what's going to happen with that.
Dr. Mansharof?
Yeah, by the way, this is exactly what's happening now in Afghanistan, because the Fatimiyun militia, which was established by Iran, are actually Afghans, people from Iran and Afghanistan. Now, they have done their mission in Syria. They assisted Nasrallah and Khamenei to preserve Assad. And now the Afghani authorities are afraid of the possibility that they will return back home and will launch a revolution in Afghanistan, those Shiites, militiamen.
Mr. Oren, but when we're looking at the situation in the Middle East, of course, we need to zoom out. We know the Middle East has gone crazy the moment, Lebanon, which is on the verge of explosion, always in various tensions, was the most peaceful country in the entire region, which just doesn't make sense when we look at this Middle Eastern, situation. But at the same time, the ongoing battles between Sunnis and Shiites have been ongoing for centuries and will continue centuries, unfortunately. But at the same time, we look at the situation and we see suddenly Iran taking into its ranks all kind of Sunni groups in order to fulfill its aspirations, primarily in attacking Israel, with Hamas being a Sunni Muslim group, Islamic Jihad being a Sunni group, other Sunni Muslim organizations that have lost their will to join forces with other Sunni groups to actually shift their direction towards supporting the Ayatollahs in Tehran.
So 3 points there. One is that borders in the Middle East are artificial and superficial. Many of the entities here in the Middle East were created by outside powers after World War I. And they do not conform to the historic lines. For instance, Iraq with its Kurdish, Sunnis, and Shiites. And there are provinces. Syria, of course, insists that Palestine and Israel are still southern Syria, according to the old Ottoman rule. So when Israel caused Palestinians, mostly refugees, to move from Jordan, from the East Bank of Jordan, towards Lebanon in the late 60s and early 70s, it changed the demographic balance in a way which later caused the civil war, brought the Syrians in, later brought the Israeli invasion, and we have what you just described. Now, you mentioned Iran. Of course, now with technology and with other resources, money, a country such as Iran, which only a few decades ago was backward and militarily very weak, can now arm itself and its proxies in a way which endangers Israel. Last point. The problem has not much to do with whether the regime or the organization is Sunni or Shiite. The question is it messianic? Is it mystic? Does it believe in Armageddon or its equivalents? Can it launch a suicide attack by nuclear weapons and thereby engulf the entire region in its ambitions? And this is where all the other moderate forces should join hands against the extremists and fanatics.
Colonel Mansharof?
I think this is all so interesting, and every point we raise teaches us something about what we need to do. For instance, we don't know enough, so we should be educating ourselves more, because every decision we make has to do with understanding the region. Mr. Oren mentioned the mistakes made in the past, and I think the biggest mistake in the Middle East was carving up arbitrarily and inventing these countries, disregarding completely, sectarian lines. And in a way, we continue to do things like that. The big mistakes in the Middle East are not only acting when you say there is weapons of mass destruction and there are not. It's this. And we may be still making these kinds of mistakes today. So that's the main lesson looking forward, of understanding the region more, even learning Arabic in Israeli schools and educating ourselves. Now, as far as the seriousness that they take it, and these are also good questions, are they just crazy? I would say they're as crazy as we are. And also in Judaism, we have things that we believe in, things that we care about, things we're passionate about. And when we're talking about Sunni and Shia, these are things that go way back to Muhammad, the understanding who was supposed to be his successor. This is not only power. Now, will they feel that they need to materialize what it says in the Quran? And remember, they may have a rift, but they agree on the Quran, and the Quran is very specific about us. So we may be very happy that they're involved with each other, but they both agree ultimately what should be with us. So also this we should understand, learn, and take into consideration.
Well, it does seem, however, that Western forces, especially the United States, for instance, when it approached Manbij city in Syria, which is believed, according to the Quran and different Muslim interpretations of the Quran, that it is supposed to be the Armageddon area, or where the final battle will ensue before the Messiah comes, something the Americans actually understood very well, and their analysts directed the various decision makers to make the right choices of not entering the territory by foot, but bombing the area from the sky and using Muslim forces in order to avoid any call to jihad by the Islamic State and other organizations that would have exemplified provide a certain victory if that were the case.
I saw the Americans go in 15 years from almost zero investment in this to taking it very seriously with country culture teams and learning as much as they can. They're doing a good job still. I'm saying the challenge for us, and we're not as good as we could be. We're good, but not good enough. So that's the challenge.
It's vital indeed to know your enemies. Dr. Mansharof, how do you perceive the elements of the Shiite angle of things with regard to the ongoing rivalry in the Middle East?
Yes, that's exactly the point, because Mr. Oren mentions the messianic missions of the regime. And we can see the relations between Shiite militias in Yemen, Bahrain, Iraq, as well as Lebanon, of course, and Syria. Their relations with Iran is at the expense of their relations with their governments. And now you can see that in the recent escalation, military escalation in the Middle East, those militias, one after the other, vowed to assist Hezbollah or to assist Iran against their governments. If there would be any war, we have seen it by declarations of the Hashachabi and the Ansarullah in Yemen. So this is exactly the illustration of the messianic efforts of Khamenei. Khamenei said several times, our mission is to destroy Israel in order to prepare the ground for the reappearance of the hidden imam.
Mm. Well, we're drawing near to the end of the program, and unfortunately we don't really have time for all of you to have your closing remarks today. Nevertheless, I think, Mr. Oren, it's very important to point out that even though this rivalry goes on for about 1,400 years, it is a rivalry that is only a matter of who should lead the final goal of capturing the world and converting everyone into Islam, something that not everybody is keen to expose immediately in the West or elsewhere. But have last sentence.
So it's very important for those teachers of Islam in Al-Azhar University and other places to counsel moderation, and for Israel to know where its priorities lie in an alliance with the moderates.
Indeed. Well, I'd like to thank Colonel Ben-Shalom, Mr. Oren, and Dr. Mansharof for being here today. And I'd like to thank our viewers as well, and we will see you next time.
You just watched TV7 Jerusalem Studio. We encourage you to pray for the challenges raised in today's program. If you were blessed by our production, please consider supporting TV7 Israel. The details of our respective bank accounts for donations from Europe and the United States appear on the screen. Your generosity allows us to continue to serve God's calling, to broadcast content that truly matters through TV7 Israel from Jerusalem.